What's up, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube? It's your boy, Jack Slack. Episode 61 of the Fights Gone By podcast coming at you on a Thursday morning. And I've just returned from a week of travel all across the world. By which I mean the United States and the north of England. Busy week, and I didn't get much writing done, so we got lots to catch up on. Conor McGregor punched a hitman's dad. There were some fights, a really good fight, in fact, two really good fights, in fact. I went to a Glory event while I was out in America, because it's always nice to if they're in the same town as you. Yeah, just lots to talk about. Right, let's get into the news. Top piece of news today, which Reddit is of course going nuts over. Luke Rockhold says UFC needs to take focus off Dana White and put it back on fighters. Now, if you don't know why the UFC focuses on Dana White, it's largely because they want the product more than any specific fighter to mean something, which is why, when they go to Europe or wherever, they can take a shit card, but it'll still sell out in seconds because people want to see the UFC. And in many respects, putting Dana White at the front and centre was a smart decision because Dana White has a much longer lifespan, or the promoter has a much longer lifespan, than a fighter. A fighter, you're going to get 20, 30 fights out of a fighter. Their peak is going to be like 5 of those fights. If you look at it this way, LeBron has played something like 1,000 games, and Conor McGregor has fought 10 times since he got to the UFC, and he fights less and less each year. Pointed this out on Reddit, and a lot of people got it and found the way that I was talking about it funny, but some people got really offended, like I was saying, yes, morally, this is the thing that they should do. But then some people are always going to be like, the fighters, without actually considering why a promotion does that. I can give you reams of examples, well, maybe not reams, but a few examples of boxing, which is a far more similar. People are always like, what about NFL, NBA, blah, blah, blah. Their biggest stars aren't the commissioners and so on. Yeah, but their biggest stars play dozens and dozens of times a year and come to your town and you can go along and cheer for them. There are only going to be 15 towns in the world if Conor McGregor fights in a different town each time that he fights in the UFC. But I can give you, half a dozen examples from boxing, which is a far more similar sport in terms of rate of activity and the way that fighters get thrown on the scrap heap in the mind of fans as soon as they lose one or two. I can give you several examples of guys who ran the boxing business, and as soon as their one big star that they invested everything in fell by the wayside, they were out of the game. Tex Rickard had a couple, so he had Jack Dempsey and Gene Tunney, but after that, he was out of the game. But he'd done well because he'd secured Madison Square Garden and actually built up summer boxing. But far more obvious examples are guys like Mike Jacobs. He got Joe Louis, he was in control for 10 years, and as soon as Joe Louis fucked off, he was out. Or his team were out because he died shortly afterwards. The IBC had a stranglehold on boxing, but as soon as Rocky Marciano disappeared, they were out of the game. Cus D'Amato shut out everyone else from the title picture, but as soon as Floyd Patterson was out of the game, Cus D'Amato was nowhere to be seen. So if you don't understand why the UFC put the focus on Dana White, that's it. I mean, if they put the focus on Matt Hughes at the same time that they started putting the focus on Dana White, they'd have had to change in 2 years. It's maybe not morally the right thing to do, but it certainly seems to be working. So if you can't understand why that is, that's why. Doesn't help that Luke Rockhold has all the personality of a damp sponge, but he did get Demi Lovato, so well done him. Other news, Stipe Miocic booked in to fight Francis Ngannou. Obviously a bit of a spoiler for what we're talking about today, but this hype train is out of control. But at least they found a heavyweight matchup that actually gets some people excited. George St. Pierre suffers from colitis, won't defend the UFC middleweight title, no one is surprised, and going on from that, Whitaker versus Rockhold is rumoured for later in the year. So we come full circle there, doing the Rockhold news, the GSP news, then onto the Whitaker Rockhold news. If we weren't already considering Robert Whitaker the actual middleweight title holder, I don't know what to say. He's the best middleweight in the world, and he's going through him at a rate of knots. Brunson Jacare Romero is already better, a better run than, any 3 opponents that Anderson Silva fought back-to-back. And on to Anderson Silva. God, this all links in so nicely today. Anderson Silva's coach, yes, the roidy 80-year-old, believes that the failed test was the result of a tainted supplement. Everyone gasps in surprise. I was watching people defend Anderson Silva while simultaneously shitting on John Jones today. It's absolutely amazing. The mental disconnect that these people have. And then someone told me, well, Anderson Silva only started getting caught after he had a career-threatening injury and was 40 years old. My response was, oh yeah, what was the career-threatening injury going into that Kelvin Gastelum fight against welterweight Kelvin Gastelum? Good guy Michael Bisping gets knocked out by welterweight on short notice so that you don't have to make excuses for Anderson Silva doing the same. And then finally, Conor McGregor is in gang war in Ireland. I woke up one morning and everyone was an expert in Irish gangland matters. Apparently, Conor McGregor has a friend who's in one gang, and he was slapping the shit out of someone from the same gang, and accidentally hit someone's dad in that same gang, and that guy is a hitman, and it was all really stupid. But if you didn't know, if you hadn't watched Conor McGregor's early interviews, he's in love with the show, what is it, Love Hate, the one about Irish gangs? And he's constantly on about El Chapo. He's like a child who's like, oh, gangsters are cool. So I can totally imagine that he wants to be part of that lifestyle. At any rate, it's making the rewrites for Notorious, which I'm due to do soon, or the revisions rather, really easy. Anyway, let's talk about some of the fights that I watched this week, because I watched fucking tons. So, while I was in New York, I hit up Glory 48, which was at the Madison Square Garden Theatre, which is on top of Madison Square Garden. And everyone in the crowd seemed to either know one of the fighters or be part of their entourage or something like that. It was very strange. But then kickboxing has always been like that. You turn up and the guys in the stadium are always somehow directly related to the guys fighting. And then people will just clear out after their guys fought. So the main event, the crowd's already half empty. It's very strange. But I thought the Super Fight series was the undercard of Glory. When I went to Glory, one of the Japanese ones, they had Road to Glory as the undercard, but I figured the Super Fight series was the undercard with one good fight on top of it to make it saleable to the UFC Fight Pass fans. But as it turns out, they do another undercard, which was all the local lads, and that was surprisingly good. There were a couple of lasses who were fighting and they just got started and they were just warming up. And suddenly they're coming out of a clinch and a lead leg high kick sort of flaps across one's face and she goes down stiff as a board and she wasn't moving for like 2 minutes. It was one of the worst I've ever seen and it came out of nowhere. Certainly the strike to reaction ratio was among the most severe I've ever seen. Then there was a great fight between this lad who came out and he looked all kinds of fancy, threw up a hook kick, threw some wheel kicks. Everyone's going, ooh, ooh, ooh. Threw a blatantly illegal elbow on the side of the crowd, but on the opposite side of the referee. And everyone goes, ooh. But the other lad just kept working the low kicks, and it was very sudden. Just suddenly I believe it was the third round, the flashy fighter started falling down. You know, he'd played off the low kicks completely perfectly up till then. You know, you thought nothing was happening with them, and suddenly he just starts falling down, and then is TKO'd by low kicks. Very interesting to see that happen. And as a firm reminder that you should always stick to them, even if it doesn't seem like they're hurting someone. Because this lad had a very good poker face. But once the Super Fight series in the main card got underway, it was all pretty good. There was this lad from, I can't remember where he was from, but he was a 6'6" middleweight, so tall lad, and he had a tie armband on, which the ref immediately told him to cut off. It was like, I warned you out the back, don't do that. But he also had all the temples and tigers tattooed on his back, the Thai style art, or the Burmese style art, I don't know, and the Thai shorts, and the shin tattoo, and I'm looking at him going, wow, this guy's serious. And his record comes up and it's 6-1, and I was like, oh, this is the guy, the equivalent of the jiu-jitsu guy who gets into the lifestyle really big before he's actually that into the sport, or, you know, had that much experience with it. And then his opponent was this Chilean dude with 60-something fights and 50 wins. So I'm looking at that and saying to my companions, oh yeah, this looks like it could be rough night for the poser with the tattoos. And then they come out, and I moments later I turn to my friends and I say, where did they find 50 guys to lose to this guy? Because he was just the clumsiest, ugliest fighter I'd ever seen. He was hitting the guy with wrists over the back of the head, missing overhands, leaning down, looking at the floor every time he punched, which we'll talk about more later with Francis Ngannou and Alistair Overeem. But just a bizarre fight. Can't even remember who won. I was just shocked that this guy. But then that's the Chilean circuit, you know. Alexander, what's her name? Valentina Shevchenko. amazing knockout artist on the Peruvian circuit, but once she started fighting actual fighters, the knockouts stopped coming. Then I watched Chris Camozzi almost kill a guy. You know, Chris Camozzi, who's trained full-time as a professional fighter for however many years, fought some part-time jobber who was 30 and had 8 fights on his record, and just beat the tar out of him, but not decisively enough that the referee ever stopped it. So it just went on forever. I think it was stopped between rounds 2 and 3. If you can watch it on Vipass, give it a look, because it's just depressing. Obviously, they'd given Camozzi this patsy to knock out, and he just couldn't manage it, but he did put a beating on him. Met Camozzi, actually. Big lad. Nice lad. Big lad, though. But yeah, shouldn't have taken that long to put that guy away. Not a great look. Also met Weidman. Everyone talks about how huge he is, but I could take him. No, I was mainly surprised by the size of his head. He has a big old noggin, that guy. And I think Aldo was there, too. Yeah, lots of, like, New York locals, Longo, all sorts of people like that. Very interesting to hear one of the fighters as a product of Longo Weidman gym, as opposed to Longo Serra, or Serra Longo, or whatever it is. But I suppose Matt Serra has nothing to do with the kickboxing aspect of it. It was my first time seeing Tiffany Van Soest, and it also happened to be the time that she lost her title in a fairly uneventful match. But I did see some cool... There was something specific that I saw that was quite cool, and I also noticed it in the highlights that they were playing beforehand. So I'm going to have a look through some of her fights, and if it's as prevalent as it looks to be, I'll put up a video on it, I think. It's just a cool little look that she has. She came out in the gladiator shorts, and my general rule, if you know the gladiator shorts, the skirt, my general rule with the gladiator shorts with dudes is you don't wear the gladiator skirt unless you can bang. If you think about it, Melvin Manhoef, whoever else, but I don't know if that applies for women, because she came out and I was like, oh, you don't wear that if you can't bang, and then she didn't really bang. But maybe it's just because she had great legs, because Melvin Manhoef has great legs as well. But she was good fun, bit of a slow fight, but I saw some stuff there that I liked. Of course, that was the female equivalent of the problem that Glory had in the male welterweight division. Which is your most marketable star in that division losing to some French person who you can't really sell and doesn't always fight that excitingly, when Nicky Hoskin lost to Cedric Doumbé. I do like Doumbé, but that fight was not the most exciting fight in the world. Then there was the tournament, the middleweight tournament, which was fun. I was rooting for the only non-American there, which was, what's his name? Something Thomas. Ryan Thomas, Roger Thomas. The lad who fought Schilling a while back, I've always liked his style, but he's never been able to put it together. He has nice combinations, nice body shots. But he put it together, went all the way through, beat Wayne Barrett, and then beat Matt something or other, Matt Lemire. Matt Lemire, he managed to turn a boring 3-round fight into a boring 4-round fight. He just kept falling in behind his head, butting this 6'9" guy right in the face, and then holding. The guy had the most boring style I've ever seen, but he took it 3 rounds. They had an extra round because they drew after the end of the round, and then he ended up in the final of the tournament. And then he fought 2.5 more rounds. So he was absolutely exhausted and got knocked out face down. At the end of that fight, because knockouts happen far more readily when guys are a bit more tired. Which is why I think that all kickboxing matches should either have 5-minute rounds or be 5 3-minute rounds. 3 3-minute rounds is not enough time to get any knockouts. I mean, they were marketing Glory on the subway and stuff as the most exciting knockouts in the sport, but they have about 2 every card. And then there was that interim featherweight title fight. Whatever Robin Van Roosmalen's up to at the moment, I have no idea. But really weird fight. Started with the Kempo guy leaping through the air, getting knocked down. Then he got up, hit the guy with an intercepting knee as he came in, and the guy paused for a second and then fell down and couldn't get up. Amazing. It was over in like half a minute, and it just left you feeling sort of like, huh. And then he went out. That was the end. But a great night of fights, I thought. I really enjoyed it. So good work, Glory. They were advertising Rico versus Ben Jamal Sadiq, who I have only seen fight live once, and that was against Peter Riots, where he put a whooping on a 40-year-old Peter Riots and still lost by getting knocked out. So, I'm not sold on Ben Jamal Ben Sadiq, whichever one it is. But at least this is a fairly accomplished heavyweight kickboxer in the modern landscape. Because it was getting to the point where Rico might end up killing someone because they're just putting him in against any old jobber. Antonio Silva, why? Anderson Braddock Silva, why? But at any rate, fun night of fights. Definitely watch the final of the tournament, Lemaire versus Thomas, and definitely watch the interim featherweight title fight, because those were crackerjack fun. UFC 218 was a very solid card. Not like top to bottom amazing, but not what the Detroit whatever paper it was put out. Oh, lacked star power, lacked quality fights. And then the guy in the article admits that he's never watched any fights. It's just fucking bizarre. But then that's how you get clicks nowadays, get the bait going. Alvarez versus Gaethje lived up to all the hype. Brilliant fight. Excellent fight by Eddie. I'm starting to think that Eddie does better when the guy is going to come to him. Against Donald Cerrone when he was stuck out of range, and when he was running after Conor McGregor, he looked perfectly made for those guys to pick him off. But when he had like RDA following him around the cage, and this fight against Gaethje, and against Chandler the second time, looks great when the guy is always going to be moving on to his punches. Looks bad when he has to close the distance and make the punches happen. But this was one of those gorgeous fights. I've not written anything about it. I might get something up at the Fight Primer or something. A bit late to put it up on Vice now, I think. But what I really love about this fight, there's two kinds of fights that most people enjoy. One is when you see a guy put his fight on the other guy completely, and it's sort of one-sided. The other is when you see the guys' styles match up in a way that it makes it a back-and-forth fight. And this was definitely an example of the latter, because Eddie Alvarez really struggles with the low kicks, and Gaethje was walking him down, high guard, taking shots on the forearms, and landing those hard low kicks. With the way that Gaethje stands, his defense is consistently underrated, I think. He takes a lot of blows on the top of the head and on the forearms, which is taking blows and not good for your health in the long term, but you're not going to get knocked out by blows on the forehead. The old bull guard, as we call it, or the Letway people call it. I'm informed, I don't speak Burmese. But the downside is that when he hunches over to take blows on the top of his head and move his head, and duck down under blows, is that he opens himself up to the uppercut. There's no way you can stand that doesn't open you to a blow, but any kind of fighting method where you're moving vertically, bob and weave, or bending at the waist, or bending at the knees, or crouching forward to take the blows on the top of the head and the guard, those all open you up to the uppercut. If you're an upright fighter, which we'll talk about more later when we're talking Ngannou, Miocic, if you're an upright fighter, the uppercut isn't there so much, but the overhand and various other techniques are. So Alvarez was doing very well finding the uppercut when Gaethje was crouching forward, and Gaethje was trying to what you have to do if you've got the high guard up like that in MMA typically is that you turn. You rotate your body so that your shoulder drops and your elbow occupies the line of the uppercut. And he was trying to do that, but he wasn't timing it very well. If you saw him against Johnson, he was doing it very well, but Johnson wasn't going to the uppercut very much at all. The other downside of the high guard, of course, is that you were exposing your midsection. And I don't think that Gaethje was doing a good enough job of getting in each time. I think he lingered too long. Because what would happen was he'd put his guard up and Eddie would bang him in the body and move away. What he really needed to be doing is, even if he got banged in the body, he needed to move forward. Because what he was doing well was getting to the clinch, using the collar tie uppercut, and hitting the body with his knees. Body work is something I'd love to see more from Gaethje anyway. And his corner always call for it between rounds. Anytime you listen to his corner, they're like, hit the body, and he goes, okay, and then doesn't. But, Gaethje's at his best when he presses the guy to the fence. And Eddie is pretty good at staying off the fence. If you saw him against Michael Chandler the second time, that's one of the examples of good cagecraft. And in fact, against RDA, he was very good at circling the cage. Because RDA traps dudes along the fence very easily and very readily. The end came with a nice knee out of the clinch, but Gaethje had been exhausted. He gets tired fighting the fight he fights anyway. I used a lot of fights in that sentence, but he gets very tired fighting his fight, regardless. But when the body shots were coming in, he really ended up sucking wind. I got a lot in the aftermath of, Jack said that Gaethje could beat McGregor. I still think it's a very interesting match for McGregor. The great thing about sitting on the sidelines for a year in the most competitive division in MMA is that the guys will all lose to each other and you won't ever have to answer the question of could you beat them. He's in the Anderson Silva spot where every fight he wins in a hypothetical and then doesn't have to fight dudes. But I thought that was a stellar performance from Eddie Alvarez. I think... stylistically, some of the stuff that Gaethje does was well made for him, because, like I said, I really like Eddie when he's on the outside and being the matador rather than the bull. But some of the stuff Eddie brought in was clearly something he'd worked on specifically for this opponent, which was adjustments, and I really like that too. So a great fight all round. I need to watch it again actually because I've watched it twice, but. It had Russian commentary. Holloway versus Aldo was a masterpiece. Again, I said this last week. Aldo coming in at short notice for this fight is very both brave and silly, in my opinion. He didn't want to do a last-minute fight against Conor McGregor when he was offered in place of RDA because he'd already lost once and he had to really make it matter the second time around because he wouldn't get a third shot. But this one he came in at short notice, and Holloway was a guy who much more completely took him apart. The punch against McGregor, you could very easily convince yourself that you just made a mistake and got clipped. If you watch that fight with Holloway, the first one, Holloway takes him apart, and Holloway took him apart even more completely in this one. And I got a question about this in the mailbag this week, which I read after having put together my thoughts on this, but someone spotted, a lot of people spotted this and it was good, but you're seeing from Holloway really good application of the jab. There's still so few in MMA, but it's not about having a ramrod jab. It's about playing with cadence and rhythm and expectation. Sometimes the jab is real, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it goes out and doesn't land on anything, sometimes it lands on the eyeball. Sometimes it's just a shoulder pump, sometimes it's a flick, sometimes it's that piston-like jab we talked about. And that's the secret with the jab. It's not the jab. It's lots of different things you can do with your lead hand to flick at this guy's eye. And within the first round, he'd already swollen one of Aldo's eyes up badly. But the other thing about Aldo is that he's a counter-striker, and if you watch his head movement, it's very reactive. He'll stand still, and then as soon as something comes, he'll slip out of the way, come back with a massive punch or counter combination, and then he'll take a break. He works on a hair trigger, so he's always reacting, which is tiring anyway, and he works in explosive counter combinations, also tiring, and then he likes to take breaks. This has always been a criticism of Aldo. If you don't come at him, he will sit back and chill. And a lot of the guys who come at him with wrestling, and they can get kneed in the gut and suffer all the nasty counters that he has. And a lot of guys come at him on a straight line like Edgar, and he can just pivot off. Or the Korean Zombie. The thing that Holloway did was with that jab, he was always there in the face of Aldo. He'd go, here's the jab, Aldo would move his head, the jab didn't come, but then the jab came at his new position, or caught him as he was coming back to the centre. He was constantly being forced to move. The pace in that fight was frenetic, and if you looked at the punch stats, Holloway was working at a way higher rate of thrown punches and a slightly, slightly less landed than Aldo, but way more thrown. So he was working at a much worse landing percentage. But it didn't matter. He was making Aldo work, and when he did land, he was flicking him right in the eyeball. Accuracy and pace. And you saw this, like the highlights of Aldo in the first and second round were when he landed one big punch. And it'd be like an uppercut on Holloway, who's already way upright. So a ton of wasted motion and a huge hernia-inducing attempt to hit him. And then Holloway would come back and go tap, tap, tap. Now is as good a time as any to just say how pleased I am with how much better boxing is getting at the highest levels of MMA. And we're going to talk about the jab more with Ngannou versus Miocic, because, all this, Ngannou is an amazing counter-striker and so on. I've not seen him, I've seen him fight one guy who threw a good jab at him, Curtis Blades. He ate the jab every time, and Curtis Blades stood still for the counter. But a good jab changes everything. And, we're not far removed from Bas Rutten, who I love, saying that the jab had no place in MMA. There was a really nice exchange, I think it was in the third round, where Aldo just started loading up hooks, and every Holloway punch went straight down the centre of the hook. It was like 4 in a row. Brilliant stuff. And I think I can say quite safely, and I've been saying this for a little while, Holloway is one of the best fighters in the world at any weight, technically, today. And I think his record is a lot strong. Like, his level of opposition is a lot stronger than Demetrius Johnson or John Jones, just because that weight class is absolutely stacked. 10 fights in a row. Well, no, what is he on? He's on 12 now. It's just ludicrous at that weight class. Feel free to get angry about that in the comments, by the way. Or start a forum thread getting angry about it. But yeah, what he's achieved in that weight class is ludicrous. The only problem is, of course, that he's run through everyone before he hit the title. Because they make, that's the nature of that competitive weight class. They make you do tons before you get a title shot. And now everyone he fights defending the title will be a rematch, except Frankie. I'm still so bummed out about that fight not happening. But I'm so glad that I stopped doing the primer for it, because I had a really cool one lined up. Oh well, never mind. They'll fight eventually. Other cool stuff. Ngannou versus Overeem. I mean, Overeem, just when I saw him immediately duck in and try and clinch with his chin way out there, I knew this was going to be one of those fights where Overeem's terrified. And then the punch, he was trying to box with him. And you're like, you have advantages in every other area. Why are you trying to box with this guy? And not really box, like throw the right hand and then lean straight back or duck way down and then got countered and knocked out. It did exactly what it was supposed to. Ngannou's last 2 fights have been to show what an amazing knockout artist he is, by knocking out the 2 men with the most knockout losses on their record in UFC history. But people are buying it. I think what you're going to see with Ngannou versus Miocic is, if Miocic uses the jab well, that's going to be a nightmare for Ngannou. He is a very static fighter, and I think, if you put the Holloway plan on him of making him move, well, the plan that he put on Hunt, lots of feints to throw off the counters and lots of real jabs to swell the eyes and set up the takedown attempts. Also, where did this, he's untakedownable come from? He's been taken down loads of times in the UFC. Anyway, that hype train is running wild. I'm glad, because, Stipe gets a lot of money if people actually tune in for the defense. And also, if he wins, fair play to him. I mean, he's a monstrous puncher, but all this, he's the hardest puncher of all time, and he's a wicked counterpuncher and all that. Slow down there. And then it wasn't a great night for the Oliveira brothers. I don't think they're actually brothers, are they? But Cowboy Oliveira and Charles Oliveira. And they both lost in very similar ways. Charles Oliveira, well, firstly, that first round against Paul Felder was a clinic in DAS defense. He's going for this DAS constantly, and Felder's always keeping the really low underhook, trying to belly down, keeping his neck straight. I think he went flat on his back at one point and pushed Oliveira overhead. And then he finally gets out. I think the end of the fight came as the first round he gets his back taken and turns into Oliveira, just like Pettis did, and then starts elbowing him. He landed some gorgeous elbows along the fence, and then the elbows that he finished with were just... Paul Felder might have some of the best elbows in MMA right now. And then Yancy Medeiros versus Alex Oliveira, was a weird fight because both of them looked really uncomfortable. They both kept landing the left hand and not really being able to deal, or rather the rear hand, because one was southpaw, one was orthodox, and they're not really able to deal with the opponent's own coming back at them. Oliveira was using tons of front snap kicks to the body. If he could turn one of those upstairs into a Brazilian kick, which is not hard on the rear leg, we're not talking Lau Feitosa Brazilian kicking people with the front leg, which is, a feat of dexterity and flexibility and balance. The Brazilian kick with the rear leg is pretty easy. So if he added a few of those, he'd actually be a lot more dangerous. And then he'd have that hand coming out so that he could throw the right hand down the center. But anyway, again, the end came as Yancy turned into him from him taking his back, and then got up, and Oliveira was exhausted, and they finished him along the fence. It's this continuing theme that we're seeing. The back is not worth giving yourself a hernia to get if you're going to end up on the bottom, because all the guy has to do is turn into you, and then he's in guard. Also, I like Yancy. I've always liked Yancy Medeiros, but I like Yancy Medeiros with a little belly more than I like Yancy Medeiros with abs. He's doing really well at welterweight. So not bad. I think I'll try and put together a boy watch for UFC 218. I don't know if there are enough boys to do 5, but I'll have a talk about the best performances. And that'll be on my YouTube channel, I think. Before we do some questions, let's have a quick plug. If you're not a Patreon boy, consider signing up to the Patreon, which keeps this podcast running. If you are a Patreon boy, there is an upcoming lecture on Customato and Floyd Patterson, which I'll be releasing this weekend. It's a story about perhaps the most unlikely heavyweight champion, and the first to ever regain the crown. It's a story about a champion who the public were very reluctant to accept. One who people never... Well, it's that story, it's that same story we were talking about with Michael Bisping and so on. If you aren't undefeated, or if you don't appear to be unbeatable, people have a very hard time buying you as the champion, even though it's almost more impressive to do it as someone who isn't that amazingly naturally gifted, someone who doesn't make it look effortless. And then, of course, it's a story about paranoia and whether Customato was savvy paranoid or downright insane. Many of the papers at the time suspected that he was actually mad, and Mike Tyson's own stories about Customato certainly paint him in that light. It's going to be a fascinating episode, so get on the Patreon, join up. And if you're on the Patreon, prepare yourself a nice cup of tea. If you haven't yet bookmarked thefightprimer.com or fightprimer.com, please do, because I post all my articles there, where'er they be. If you have an email to send to the podcast or a question to send to the podcast, send it to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. And if you haven't picked up Notorious, it's back in stock on Amazon, having blasted through the first print run. And it'll make a brilliant present for someone who doesn't understand why you like fighting so much. Perhaps a spouse. Right, let's do some questions then. Hey Jack, I'm a long-time fan writing to you for the first time. I've been going back and re-listening to your podcast, and on Fights Gone By podcast number 8, you talk about the physical toll that toe kicks and single protruding knuckle strikes can take on one's body, and how they are not common in high-level MMA. I know that you are aware of Shane Campbell, seeing that you've written about him before after his Hadouken highlight in WSOF. I don't even remember that. But he is somewhat notorious in Canada for his toe stab liver kicks. He has several toe stab knockouts on his record, both in MMA and Muay Thai. And I am wondering if you are familiar with these performances. Additionally, can you shed any insight on how to effectively deliver a toe stab kick? I've been messing around with it a bit in sparring, but thus far have not had a lot of success to show for my efforts. Do I just flex the big toe as if I was trying to pull it to my shin and then throw some heat? Or is there a bit more subtlety going on that I need to address? Any help would be much appreciated. Thanks a bunch, Ben Pizza. And Ben linked a video of Shane Campbell landing one of these toe kicks, and it's legit. I didn't even know about this. So if you Google Shane Campbell and find some of his body kicks, because you would definitely enjoy this if you're listening to this podcast. Toe kicks generally, or sumasaki, you want to do something with your toes. Don't pull it back towards your body. In fact, generally, if you're doing a front kick with the ball of the foot, I would recommend against pulling your toes back hard, because as soon as you slam them into something, they're going to be, forced back even further. A lot of guys who are very good with the ball of the foot kicks, they just, they kick with the right part of their foot and they leave their toes relaxed so that their toes are just moved out of the way when they hit the target. Straining them back and then hitting something can cause sprains and things. In regards to sumasaki, the classical Okinawan method is to cross the, what would be your index toe? Wait, no. Okay, so cross your second toe over the top of your big toe and make a little spear out of your foot that way. That's one way. The way that the Uechi Ryu guys do it, which is a little bit cooler, is that they pull their toe in so that it's sort of like a claw. So you bend it at the first joint, but you keep the toe level. You don't pull it all the way back. Definitely worth a Google. Google Sumasaki, Tsumasaki, or they call it something different in Uechi Ryu, like Tiger Knuckle or something, I think. Yeah, I think toe kicks would be an amazing investment for a kickboxer or an MMA fighter. Not so much knuckle strikes and things like that. I mean, if you've ever seen the Boshiken, which is the thumb knuckle, the middle thumb knuckle, that's nuts. Conditioning that to be able to hit with it. But thanks, Ben. Gonna go on a Shane Campbell binge now. Hey Jack, I've been a grappler for a few years and I'm relatively new to striking. When I'm striking and I have distance, I can work and put together combinations. But if I'm facing someone who uses a lot of pressure, I kind of just shell up and don't know what to do. Do you have any mindset tips or tricks to help me handle being in the pocket and being pressured so I can avoid being the next Donald Cerrone? Cheers from William. P.S. I was born and live in the United States and have a speech impediment, so whenever someone mistakes it for being British and asks about it, I just go with it and say I am. That's good. It does get you class points. I noticed that this weekend. Though I was at a deli, one of the famous delis in New York, and I was with some English friends, and there were some English clowns on another table going, "Excuse me, sorry, coming through, terribly sorry," and doing all that stuff. And we looked at each other and said, fuck, we're not like that, are we? So we commoned it up a bit. Start dropping off the G's and things. Anyway, pressure, tricky. Like, it was one of those things you have to get used to. But then if your problem is trying to handle being in the pocket, just don't be in the pocket. You know, the difference between being in the pocket and being in the clinch is getting a hold of someone, get chest to chest with them. Have a look at Floyd Mayweather versus Ricky Hatton. Anytime Ricky Hatton's chasing him, he throws the right straight, and whether it hits or misses, he moves straight into the clinch and ties him up. Elbows are a very good way to stop people. I mean, it depends if this is... pressure means using your presence to threaten someone, but it makes you a lot more hittable. So if you feel you can like hold off a guy with a jab, that's one thing. But the nice thing about guys coming at you is that a lot of people, unless they're very good pressure fighters, they'll just be opening themselves up for the right hand lead, which is something that typically is dangerous to do, or more dangerous to do than leading with a jab. But if aggression is the name of their game, they're shortening your right hand lead by stepping onto it each time. So that's something you can play with. Alternatively, a nice thing that Willie Pep used to do is, as the guy was walking in, he'd take a step back and then he'd throw a right uppercut from way behind him, and then immediately duck and weave out to the side. So right uppercut and duck the head down and weave out to the right side. Because when you've thrown the uppercut, you raise the opponent's head, and as they're pulling back, they're very unlikely to throw an uppercut. So you can just weave off to the side and get out the side door. That's something I quite like. And Roy Jones used to do it with the lead uppercut. But those are some things to play with. Right hand lead into the clinch. Just tying up generally. Nodder if you feel like it. I mean, practice it, but don't use it against your partners in training. You can do it with your forearms. Just jam them in their face if you're sparring in headgear and stuff. But a nodder is a very good one against a pressure fighter. And a nodder into a left hook, whether it be to the head or the liver. Or Evander used to go, let them run onto his head and then hit him in the crotch immediately afterwards with the left hook. But, Evander. I should make an Evander Holyfield guide to cheating, or study in cheating at some point. And then those two uppercuts that I talked about, lead uppercut and weave out to the left, rear uppercut and weave out to the right. The rear uppercut's probably easier. But those are some things to play with. Everyone, those are some things to play with. Quite cool. Cheers, William. Dear Jack, give me some slack. It sounds like the UFC game has fucked up grappling again, but do you think it would actually be possible to translate such a tactile-based art into something visual and auditory like a video game? Yours faithfully, a recent Earl Grey convert, John. Now, I think grappling's way too difficult. There's too much going on. And if you watch like the high-level submission-only grappling stuff now, so much of it is about clever setups, putting yourself in a position that's not quite right, just so that they do something, and then you can reap the leg or whatever. I was watching the EBI this weekend, and Craig Jones is just hitting these crazy backstep heel hook setups or inside Senkaku setups. But yeah, there's so many options in the grappling game, and a lot of the grappling game is going one way until you hit resistance and then immediately trying to pass the other way or attack the other side, and doing it over and over again. As Keenan Cornelius did a great seminar on guard passing, and that was something that he didn't used to do very much, and then he obviously... Well, like the Meows, after he hit a certain level, he had to learn to guard pass and wrestle. And he said something which I really keep in mind a lot, which is guard passing is mainly failing. Like, you spend 70% of the time failing and then you pass, even if you're really good at it. So, yeah, it's a hard thing to get into game form. I did say I'd review the EA UFC game, so I'll have to get that. I'm not looking forward to it tremendously because it's the same game every year. But I really miss Fight Night. Fight Night was a good game because you're dealing with, you've only got 6 punches, straights with either hand, hooks with either hand, uppercuts with either hand, and then you can go head or body with either one. And then, you've got side steps and fadeaways and head movement. And just with those 3 different paths of the punches, you have so much variety. It's like Nidhogg. Nidhogg's pretty fun. Very limited number of things you can do, but they match up in a way that you can feint things and do interesting things, and it's very frantic and exciting. I think that like when you add all this stuff and create a character, and you give hundreds of different special moves, and everyone who's got 94 or whatever, all the top guys on the game have all the moves. Demetrius Johnson and John Jones can do capoeira shit that they've never ever done in the cage. I think that's where the game gets really boring, because you make, what have they got, 500 fighters on the roster, so they made maybe 200 characters in the game, and I don't remember what it was on the last one, but 200 characters on the game, and they don't feel different, they just feel worse than the 3 best characters. But anyway, full review coming soon. Right, before we go, we got some interesting fights this weekend. We'll only really talk about a couple, but the big one is obviously Guillermo Rigondeaux versus Vasily Lomachenko. Obviously, 2 of the most accomplished amateur boxers of all time. I believe they both won 2 Olympic medals. They've both gone on and had successful professional careers. Obviously, Guillermo Rigondeaux really broke onto the big stage when he upset Nonito Donaire. Nonito Donaire was everyone's favourite because he was a phenomenal knockout artist in a very low weight class. Obviously, Nonito Donaire was a big star because he was firstly Filipino-American, which is 2 major demographics in boxing hit there, especially after Manny Pacquiao, but also a tremendous knockout artist in the bantamweight class, which isn't particularly common. So Rigondeaux took his WA super bantamweight title, in April of 2013. Problem is that he's really not done a lot since then. Fought twice in 2013, fought twice in 2014, fought once in 2015, once in 2016, and then had 1 no contest earlier this year. Rigondeaux is one of those guys that people point to as someone who was mismanaged, because it seems like, he's never going to be a star in the knocks out a lot of people way of being a star, but he was riding high off that win over Nonito Donaire. He is one of the greatest boxers competing today, beautiful to watch. If you were going to sit someone down and say, here's the art of boxing, he's the guy, because he gets hit very, very little. But yeah, he's just he fell off the face of the earth for a couple of years there. Vasily Lomachenko is interesting in a different respect, career-wise. Don't believe he's been mismanaged terribly, but what he did do was he came out of the amateur ranks and then went at a world title in just his second fight against Orlando Salido, which was the fight that he lost famously due to some cheeky play by Salido. What you'd expect from the savvy professional boxer. The guy who fights without headgear is going to butt you. That's what you got to expect. But since then, he's been flawless. He's now at 9-1, and he knocks out a lot of dudes. He's beautiful to watch. It's almost like in this match, you've got the brilliant defensive technician versus the brilliant offensive technician. And obviously, Guillermo Rigondeaux can get his own punches in when he wants to, and Vasily Lomachenko is very defensively sound. But if you look at both of them, the styles of the 2 of them, Rigondeaux is far more defensively minded, and Vasily Lomachenko is far more in the business of pushing the action and cutting the angles. Both of them do interesting things. I mean, Rigondeaux uses lots of cross steps. Vasily Lomachenko constantly stepping to the outside of that lead foot against his orthodox opponents and hitting the pivots around. Does this really nice long right hook behind the opponent's guard as he pivots, and then throws in the left hook as they turn to face him. The left uppercut, normally to the solar plexus, but sometimes straight up the middle, catches him in the head. Beautiful jab, beautiful left straight. Lovely uppercut he finished. Who was that against? Was that Souza? The last lad he finished with an uppercut, which was where he threw a wide, slow hook out so that the other guy ducked and then came up with the uppercut to catch him as he was ducking. Beautiful stuff. He's really offensively minded, and he's got an eye for openings, whereas Guillermo Rigondeaux is much better at taking stuff away from the opponent. The interesting thing about this fight, obviously, is that both are southpaws. Occasionally, you've seen them both switch, but both are southpaws for the main part. And a lot of their favourite moves, like Rigondeaux's crazy cross step and Lomachenko's step outside the lead foot to pivot round, those are moves that really work best for them against orthodox opponents. I mean, obviously, neither of these guys is going to be taken aback by meeting a southpaw, and they fought before anyway as amateurs. But it does sort of take away some of the things that we're familiar with from their A games, and changes up the angles slightly, of course. What I really like about both men is that long amateur lineage means that they've fought, hundreds of different people. Maybe not long, grueling fights. It's only a few rounds, and it's more of a point-scoring contest than it is looking to knock anyone out. But that amateur pedigree, when you're fighting multiple times in a day at a tournament, and you just have to come up with your strategy, immediately after you've found out who your opponent is, that really makes for quick thinking and adaptive fighters. And that's what both these guys have proven to be. Whereas if you jump into the pro ranks very early, you can get stuck in your one method that's worked for you best, and you try and brute force everything. Whereas these guys who have the long amateur careers tend to have to adapt and change quite a lot. Again, generalizations, but that's which is one of the things that I like about that long amateur lineage. Obviously, it's not something everyone can indulge in. If you come from a poorer country, or even a poorer background in a better off country, you're going to want to make some money soon. You can't give up, at least 5 years of your life to try and win 2 gold medals at the Olympics. I really don't know what to expect in this one. Regardless of what happens, I will be watching, and I'll have something up on Monday about it because it promises to be a good one. I've not been keeping up to date with their most recent fights, but since this fight has been announced, I've been so excited for it. It's just boxing in a nutshell. When you get the 2 best guys against each other, suddenly it pulls you back in. Godfather 3. And then what's the UFC got matched up against that? I think Bellator's got an event this weekend too. So tough to go against. But equally, that's no matter how much you want that to be a massive money fight, and it should get millions of views. I very much doubt that Rigondeaux and Lomachenko are going to draw multiple millions of buys. They are very much fighters for the boxing fan as opposed to fighters for the fight fan. Bellator are back in Italy, giving Alessio Sakara a fight against Rafael Carvalho. Why is Sakara... I remember him fighting recently, but I don't remember being that impressed. But he's fighting Carvalho, which I presume is for their middleweight title. And then a load of people you've never heard of on the undercard. Or on the main card, actually. It's another one of those ones with 5 fights announced, and then they'll just fill out the card with local lads. And then the UFC event, Cub Swanson versus Brian Ortega. Like that a lot. Cub Swanson, very good at getting up off his back. But if you remember the Ricardo Lamas fight, Ricardo Lamas kept trying to hit that arm triangle as Swanson got up because he puts his hands to the mat and crawls up along the fence. Could be fun if Ortega can get him down to see what he can do. And Ortega's striking's been improving lately, but Cub Swanson, he can come out looking good and technical, but he can also come out looking like a wild man, and that lets him down against guys like Frankie Edgar. But I would think that Swanson's the better striker of the two. Always on the lookout for that ultra-low low kick, especially against a guy with like a Brazilian jiu-jitsu background. You're always going to be able to try and knock them off their feet with your kicks. Elsewhere on the card, you've got Jason Knight. Fair enough. Daryl Horcher, the man who tried to go in at short notice against Habib. That was a brave decision. Alexis Davis versus Liz Carmouche. Davi Ramos, who I remember from that wicked arm bar through the guard at ADCC that year. Yuri Alcantara. And then Aljo is fighting... Aljamain Sterling, rather. Aljo is fighting Marlon Moraes, who fought less than a month ago. I can't see anything about that being a late replacement or anything. I don't know what's going on there. But that's an interesting fight. I would say that's probably my must-watch fight aside from the main event. Fairly slow week, like UFC, MMA-wise, but you got that big fight in the boxing at the weekend. But yeah, we'll reconvene next week and talk about all that happened. I'm your boy Jack Slack. This has been the Fights Gone By podcast. Join the Patreon, buy the book, read the fight primer, and pray to Gaethje. Cheers.